Good afternoon, viewers. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to have a webinar, and our title is Do Rural African Young People Have a Future in Agriculture? Joining me from across various regions of Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, Central and East Africa are various panelists. I'll introduce the speakers. We have Dr. Elena Amadila. She's a lecturer at University of Namibia in Windhoek in the Faculty of Commerce and Economics. Her research interests include agriculture, finance, education, and disability studies. We've got Gertrude Zifa Tovekive. She pursued a PhD in development studies at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research at the University of Ghana. Her research interests include agrarian livelihoods, labor, gender, and migration issues. She's a program officer for Feminist Africa Journal at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. We've got Ms. Rahama Hassan. She's a social economic researcher from Kenya and a PhD fellow at the University of Nairobi and the University of Copenhagen. Currently, Rahama is working on land rights resilience among pastoralist and agro-pastoralist communities in Kenya. Rahama holds a Master of Arts degree from the Institute for Development Studies and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Nairobi. We have Dr. Ibrahim Ka from Senegal. He's a researcher at Agriculture and Rural Prospective Initiative, and he's also seconded at the Regional Coordination Unit of the International Land Coalition, Frindex Regional Coordinator of Global Land Alliance. So welcome to you all, our panelists. Today is really a sad day as we are having this webinar because a lot of things are currently happening in Africa. As we speak right now, over the last 2 weeks, we witnessed a lot of challenges and big problems in Nigeria. The Nigerian youth are demanding an end to extrajudicial killings and brutality, and we also share this concern with the Nigerian youth. And to the Nigerian government, we say end SARS and stop police brutality against the civilians. We demand justice for all the victims of police brutality and killing in Nigeria. We say end SARS. We are in solidarity with Nigerian youth. On October 2020, the Nigerian army killed reportedly about 78 people, and we stand in solidarity with those demanding justice in Nigeria, especially against youth and everyone else. We are also deeply concerned about repression and violence in Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and the more enduring one in many other African countries. We say end SARS, end SWAT, make progressive democratic reforms, end massacres against youth and everyone else. Like I mentioned before, the title of our webinar is Do Rural African Young People Have a Future in Agriculture? Studies indicate that the rural population of Africa is growing, and studies estimate that 70% of which is close to 1 billion of African population is under the age of 30, and it's expected to grow at an annual rate of 2.7% a year. Against the background, there's the rise in agricultural commercialization, large-scale farming, increased concentration of land, and the failure of intergenerational land transfers, as well as rising youth unemployment, as well as persistent poverty. It is against this background that we are going to have this webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to interrogate whether these challenges are engineered exogenously or endogenously. And we also want to know to what extent rural young people can shape the policy framework. Among other issues, this webinar is aimed at addressing what is the employment situation in Africa, what programs are implemented, how inclusive are they, are the young people visible, and are they interested in agriculture? Do they control land? If not, why is it they don't control land? To address these issues from various speakers, we'll start with Rahama Hassan. Rahama, over to you.
Thank you, George, and everyone for joining us. The question on whether African young people have a future in agriculture is interesting at a time when we have a bulging demographic of young people in Africa, and the numbers are increasing and projected to triple in the coming decades. So I start by sharing what I view as the context for agriculture in our region in East Africa and applies to other parts of Africa where most of our sub-Saharan Africa is agrarian, and agriculture is supported by rain, so it's rain-fed agriculture, and the sector is also dominated by small-scale holders, except in former settler colonies. So the histories of these communities and the colonial history cannot be dissociated on the plight of young people and the populations in these countries. So the colonial histories have shaped what has become the peasant economy in our part of the world, where the poorly mechanized agricultural production with little forms of accumulation, which can neither reproduce property. And this is the situation in which the African young people find themselves in. And the nature of how these farm holdings are rudimentary and the dependency on the family labor prevents any form of accumulation or any form of taking charge by young people who are depending on the intergenerational transfer from their parents, or who use these forms of any form of accumulation to support their needs, including taking them to school. In thinking about the young people and where they find themselves, and with accumulation taking long, there is also the aspect of social differentiation, even where accumulation is attempted by some small-scale farmers with the poor markets in our part of the world. So if they are young people, certain categories of young people will definitely be left out. In short, I mean to say that we do not have a homogeneous group of young people in Africa. Instead, we can disaggregate this into those who are further disadvantaged and excluded from the economies, where depending on where they live. And in these peasant agrarian economies, the youth are poorly adopted to it. The nature of how these economies in our countries are organized are not very lucrative or attractive to young people. For example, when the parents who work in these peasant farms make some money to take their children to school, these young people aim to work in offices, take up bureaucratic jobs, and they are not trained to do peasant farming, even in school. So this creates a further disconnect for the young people and who are doing farming. And in recent times, we have seen universities and technical colleges adopting, enhancing skills or teaching agriculture in these institutions. But it has also been found that these courses are not meant to enhance the skills, further deepening the taking away the youth from these spaces. So the form of education that the young people who are all moving from the rural areas to the universities in urban areas distances them further from these agricultural practices, and their innovations or ideas have no place in these sectors, which require a lot of capital, by the way, given the different conditions in our country for viable agriculture. So, in view of this, I would like to also point to the general context of agrarian context and its potential in our continent. And one of the main issues here is the land question, and where do young people find themselves in this persistent and resolved land question in our countries. So in addition to the immediate economic importance of a source of food for most of the rural people in Africa, land is important and a form of what would call access to finances, and there are persistent poor returns to agricultural investments, even where people have some form of ownership of access to land. There's also an emergence of commercial farmers in rural areas, but these are making other forms, they are creating landlessness among the young people and some of their families. So with the accumulation of some land by those who can afford, and what I've mentioned earlier, the rise in demographic pressure, it's become a fairly contested resource and an area that many people in the rural areas are being pushed out back to the informal sector in the urban areas. where the urban youth themselves are struggling to make a living. With this class of commercial farmers who hire labor in the growing landless group in rural areas, the young people in Africa are finding themselves in this space, which cannot even absorb a fraction of them who are growing in numbers daily. And we can also ask ourselves, how inclusive is agriculture in Africa or in Eastern Africa, for instance? And for me, this question needs to answer whether the agrarian profits benefit youth in any way. But with the competition over access that is driving the rural economy, we see little benefits, given that they are not the owners of capital or land in these areas, and where they are able to participate through the different government projects, like smart agriculture. These are just suggestions and funding that has come from outside that is attempting to incorporate the rural youth to participate. So, and it's crucial for people to survive in the rural areas through their different social relations, which the young people may not have an advantage over the older people who have the kingship ties, their neighbors, and some form of political will. Like Sarah Berry says, that you need to accumulate some form of social relations through patrons or loyal supporters to command some material wealth per se. In terms of the future, we have some data which is not conclusive here in East Africa, like in Kenya, indicating that 10% of the youth are involved are, are, um, are, are involved in agriculture compared to, I think this percentage is lower compared to other regions in Africa. And even though it's low, there's a general trend of youth in Africa, in Kenya especially, moving away from agriculture and the rural areas as a whole. But there is a chance for the future of the youth of Africa if the harsh climate change situation will push that their innovation and their education can have a place with projects like the smart agriculture, which gives abundance with a variety of raw agricultural inputs where we have value adding capacities which can dramatically change the space for young people in agriculture. And of course, we cannot fail to mention the restricted agricultural spaces and the wage labor provided in the big farms, which has also been found in some studies to be extractive. And the context of the family labor farm, which in many peasant families may not be fulfilling for the youth. So I submit that value addition would interest.
Rama, can you please wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So value addition would interest young people, and that would be the future. That would be one of the pathways of the future for young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rama, for such a critical intervention. We move over to Dr. Ibrahim from Senegal. Please go ahead.
Thank you, George, and it's my pleasure to join this wonderful group for discuss about this issue of youth. Mine is just to bring in the basket some questions, some observations that we can build on. And as a starting questions, this is, are the youth, young people visible, but also are they involved, or do they want to get involved? I think this is the two ways that I see the things. And are they interested in agriculture? And more specifically, are they interested in accessing and controlling over land? The situation is that right now, the young people represent a massive part of the population. And I think here in Senegal, the biggest part of the population is composed of youth. And hopefully, we are not dying because of COVID, because I think Africa is a young continent. This is an asset to build on, but also can be a bombing situation a bombing situation that the government has to deal with. And each year, more than 3,000 people or 3,100 people come into the job markets. And are they visible? Yes, I can say yes. The young people are now very, very visible. They are very dynamic. They are getting more educated. Just to consider the rate of PhD holders in the continent now compared to the past, but also they are living in a tech world, profiting from a range of opportunities, internet connectivity, and creating a lot of startups. But also they are investing politics, investing also public and private decision-making tables, and what we can see also in the agricultural sector is young people are investing the value chain from farm to forks. They are in the production, the transformation, transportation, commercialization. A lot of initiative out there. But when it comes at the household level, what we can see is, are the young people enough vocal, or do we hear them mostly? And this is something very informative, because at the household level, mostly maybe the young people are not heard. But this is also something depending on the context, and this is also something that is changing, because what I can see here in Senegal is now in our villages we are more and more having young people as village chiefs, and not a chief at the villages, and this is also something very nice for me. But what the issue is, and the issue is about maybe the participation. Let me highlight it by using some point. Mostly, I think, and this is also one observation, less and less young people are less interested in agriculture, because agriculture no longer fit its man in a context of climate change, in a context of almost chronic rainfall deficit, and also agriculture is not enough sexy to attract young people. And in a context where quantity of land is small regarding the need of the family, it's a very common situation. Older people can experience, or young people and even older people can experience some difficulties in accessing and controlling land. And this is also something we need to take into account when advocating around that issue of young people accessing land. And another example that I can pick randomly is here in Senegal and then in West Africa, we have peasant platforms, but those peasant platforms, they create within their networks a table for the young people. But when it comes to contribute or to defend position in land and security related matters, young people or even females are considered as part of the household system. And this is a unique. So the advocacy is around the household system, and then the youth and the women all are part of the household system. So we cannot individualize, we cannot use them as a separate actor. And this is, I think, also a paradox. A paradox. And in one hand, we are advocating for promoting youth and gender empowerment, and then another hand also we are promoting the family farming system around us, how to hold the system. And another point that I can pick also randomly is during our participatory and inclusive land reform process in Senegal, we had a lot of meetings, right? But to come up with the document of the policy document, but we cannot, what we were experiencing in that is there was an issue to document the youth participation because the data was not available, because when setting up the attendance list, the category age was almost forgotten, and this is also something we have to take into account, the data around youth participation. And we didn't have also a valuable formal contribution from youth institution. They only talk about the quota, having quota for youth, and this is very small. So talking about data, I can also here bring one of my hat. I'm the regional coordinator of Prindex, and we are producing data on perception around the continent, and 34 countries have surveyed, and here we have the the result. You can see the perception of insecurity of youth, depending whether they are in urban or rural area, and you can compare now from all the regions and then the global average, and you can see that in Africa the perception of insecurity is higher than everywhere compared to the world. And I can also maybe highlight some going on, some positions that institutions are taking. I can say that at ILC, this issue of youth is becoming very critical in our strategy, and I think we are taking into account. But also we are supporting some platforms, some multi-stakeholder platforms at national level, and this issue of youth is really taken into account. I can here highlight the example of Malawi, where the strategy is really taking into account the youth situation. But also we have organized a lot of events, right? And then the African Union also talk about the aspiration 6 of the Agenda 63, talk about this issue of youth, and they are conducting a study on securing land tenure for youth in Africa. But also IFAD is reviewing good practices as in addressing the use of the issue of youth access to land. And those are, I think, global initiatives that are undertaken in the region, and this is highlighting that this issue of youth is very, very valid within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim, for bringing public policy into the discussion concerning youth and agriculture. You did it on a broad perspective from your own data and from other studies. We now move over to Zifa. Zifa, please go ahead.
Thank you, George. So I'm presenting this using the Ghanaian context that despite the declining contribution of agriculture to Ghana's GDP, it remains the highest employer of the populace. And we can see that resilience even within this COVID period. Agriculture within the second sector, the second quarter grew by 2.5%, while the other sectors remain in the negative. Growth figures are in the negative. So it tells you the resilience of the sector and how it could help in solving unemployment, especially rural youth unemployment. Currently, we see that in Ghana, we've not seen agrarian transition has not yet happened. When we say agrarian transition, I mean the transition from agricultural livelihoods to industrial production, as the context in Europe depicted over a long time ago. But what we see is an agrarian shift from agrarian livelihood to services. So you see a lot of people in trade and trading, many other things. Even there, it should be noted that agricultural raw materials are very crucial in these shifts. So you have people doing food trade, for instance. So why is it that agriculture is so important in employing people, yet its contribution to GDP is declining? How are you located in this? We see structural changes in the agriculture sector over the years, especially since the structural adjustment programs were implemented from the 1980s. And we know the implications that this has had for land and other reproductive resources. The Ghana Statistical Service just released an agriculture census, and it showed that young people who constitute about 30% in the agriculture production in rural areas do not have access to the productive resources that they need to produce. Because we do know that our policy focus in Ghana, for instance, we have focused on cash crops, the raw exports. Meanwhile, we know that when we look at other parts of the chain, the processing, marketing, distribution, where you can work, we do not have states focusing on that. So we see that our agriculture sector is more productivist. The policies are just going to increase yield, just produce. So what happens in the middle is nearly not a focus. However, that is where you can see significant contribution of the youth. So we see processing, distribution, marketing, and also the development of innovative ways in the sector where the youth can contribute, but the state doesn't invest in that part. So the question of reproductive resources also remain unaddressed, and now we have more of this happening. So, for instance, the land issue, we've had land reforms, new land policies, and reforms that are encouraging land markets. So, I was reading a report on the land acquisitions in Ghana from the land metrics register. We document land acquisitions all over the world. And one company, for instance, acquired 400,000 hectares of land in a rural area. And in Ghana, we know land sizes, agricultural land sizes are below 2 hectares. So when you acquire that, what it does is that you are displacing a lot of people. We have seen mineral extractions going on. So you ask yourself, how inclusive are these? We have talked about the inclusiveness of land reforms. When we talk about that, we realize that youth are not usually part of the decisions to give out land to companies. It's the elderly, the village elders, the family heads, and also the labor part of the whole agriculture issue. We know that many people, young people in rural areas, those who do not have land, migrate to other areas during agriculture production season to engage in agricultural labor to get money. But while that is going on, we see that farmers are also complaining about high agricultural wage. The labor cost is high. Meanwhile, the laborers, the young people are saying the cost, the amount being paid is too small. So what is happening? I see that it is about the general condition in rural areas, which we can link to the larger macroeconomy. So you need cash to do many things. But at the same time, to pay school fees, to go to the hospital, but at the same time, the state is withdrawing the social intervention programs that are not, even those that are functioning, are very partisan. So the little that a farmer could pay will not be enough for a young person. So what we say is a migration to urban areas. And we also see in terms of gender, we know that when in many parts of Africa, when we hear youth, it is male. So we also see in the household that we have inequality in resource distribution, and which the access also favors males, and females are usually not prioritized. But the youth have contributed a lot. There's new marketing systems that are emerging that are led by youth innovations. This COVID period, for example, has shown us how online food commerce has, food staff commerce has emerged. And these are ways that we can engage the youth in the agriculture sector. So we need progressive land reform, state investment in agriculture, especially in processing, distribution, and marketing. And for me, that's where the youth potential could be tapped. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zifa, for taking us to Ghana, emphasizing on gender, labor issues, as well as laying the groundwork for what has to be done ahead. We now move over to Dr. Elena. Please go ahead, Doc.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
No, Doc, we can't see the screen. Can you please try again?
Okay. Okay. Stop sharing. Okay, I guess I'll have to do this without it because I don't know what's. Anyway, I'll talk about the issue of youth and agriculture in Namibia. Particularly, I'll focus on the agricultural context in Namibia, where we're coming from, and then I'll also talk about the issue of inclusivity and the land issues when it comes to the involvement of youth in agriculture. But before I start, I would want to start off with a quote that I find very applicable, especially in the Namibian situation where the participation of youth in agriculture is very low. Quote, youth participation should not or should be seen more to work with youth and not merely work for them. Youth are neither problems to be solved nor passive beneficiaries. Instead, they are likely to be a valuable resource. That's from the Food and Agriculture Organization report of 2012. Now, the youth employment in Namibia, the situation there is that youth constitutes, when it comes to employment issues, the youth unemployment rate stands at 46.1%. Yeah. Now, when we're talking about youth, we are talking about individuals between the ages of the definition of youth 15 and 34, and this group makes up about 66% of the Namibian population. Now, that is a youthful population when you talk about figures such as 36% making up the population. But the other thing is also that as much as 70% of the Namibian population depends on agricultural activities, Namibia's agriculture lies in the hands of the old and infirm and those left behind or retired into rural areas as the youth seek opportunities in the urban areas. For example, the average Namibian farmer is aged 68 years old, and the majority, you find them in other sectors. Now, Namibia's 2.13 million inhabitants, a small population, as much as 70% of its population depends on agriculture, or indirectly or directly, for a portion of their income, either comes from what is left over in terms of, for those who are doing subsistence farming. The different farming systems of Namibia can be organized as you'd have small-scale mixed farmers. You'd have those in cattle ranching, small livestock, and commercial crop production. The other thing is that Namibia is blessed with rich natural resources, and you find that agriculture contributes around 5% of the GDP, gross domestic product, through 25% to 40%. Although 25% to 40% of Namibians depends on subsistence agriculture, only 2% of Namibia's land receives sufficient rainfall to grow crops. Livestock remains a foreign exchange earner, a very big foreign exchange earner for the country. For example, in 2016, Namibia became the first and only African country eligible for beef export to the United States, and in recent years, the export of crops, vegetables has grown by value of which crops like grapes has been the largest contributor. Despite that, there are some programs that have been implemented, but the big challenge with those programs that have been implemented is that none of these programs would say focus specifically on youth. Yeah, in agriculture. Yes, there are programs for youth, but not to focus on agriculture per se. Now, there, for example, there's what we call the Harambee Prosperity Plan, which was introduced as a plan really to fight the issues of poverty and provide more opportunities for youth. For example, there are street committees that are responsible for the identification of vulnerable households. And youth are employed to look for this, in these committees, identify these vulnerable households, how they can be assisted in terms of food and all the basic necessities that a household would need. The Harambee Prosperity Plan, also in the Ministry of Youth, Sports and National Service, also rolled out training programs for youth, in terms of empowerment programs. But in addition, although these programs are not focusing particularly on agriculture alone, there's the Namibian Youth Credit Scheme under the Ministry of Youth, which targets all Namibians between the ages of 18 and 35. And this is a loan guarantee program aimed at providing financial support to youth who do not have adequate, for example, finance to get money from financial institutions, for example, banks. But like I said at the beginning, these programs are not, there's no program that I would say is focusing particularly on youth in agriculture. Now, in terms of inclusivity, are they included in these programs? Now, the participation of youth in Namibia when it comes to, for example, policy formulation and agriculture depends really on the level of consultation that the government has with the national youth institutions. Now, it also depends on the political will of the government to implement the youth policies adopted nationally and internationally. And consultation normally takes place, consultation of youth now takes place when there are established structures, for example, through the NYC, the National Youth Council, that serves as a link between the youth and the national government. But these adopted measures to ensure youth participation in important decision-making still finds this low level of participation by Namibian youth in agricultural activities, which threatens the future of the agricultural sectors. Why are youth not interested? Let's talk about, for example, the land issues. Government support to youth in the agricultural sector is poor and little is targeted at the youth. For example, there was a post-land reform in Namibia where only 6% reached youth and women. And when we talk about, although there's a national land policy that focuses on customary laws regarded as rules, these are far less significant for inheritance purposes, as there's room for flexibility where, for example, inheritance practices are discriminatory practices where inheritance, for example, are particularly disgraceful or look beyond or overlook these rules about who should get land. Normally, land is granted by relatives.
Can you please wrap up?
Yeah, I'll do so in a minute. And when you're talking about what then needs to be done when you're thinking about youth and agriculture, there needs to be more targeted interventions to youth in agriculture and give them a voice. And engaging with youth should not just involve consultations, but acting more upon their advice and looking at holistic approaches that go far beyond simple consultations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elena, for this careful dissection of the land question in Namibia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for your insights. We have some questions, but before we go to the questions from our viewers, I also have one or two questions. My first question goes to Rahama. Rahama, you presented that in Kenya there is a problem of intergenerational land transfer. Can you explain, why is it they can't hand over the land to the youth? Thank you.
Thank you, George, and everyone else for your contribution. The question of intergenerational transfer is pegged on can be looked at broadly in the land reform that is going on in the country. So there are traditional ways of transferring land, which communities have practiced, but the increase in the individualization and individual property, then the prospects for young people to own this land diminishes, because over time the community, the sons, especially the young men, would automatically get a portion in most of African communities to start farming or start their agriculture on their portion. But over time now, with the diminishing land and selling of land with the large scale acquisition, where even those who need to pass it over are finding it lucrative to sell part of it to survive. So this has been affected. The traditional ways of intergenerational transfer has been affected by the reforms and the large-scale acquisition and privatization of land in the country, I would say.
Thank you so much, Rama, for noting that commodification of land is exacerbated, the reduced, giving of land to the youth. I have a question for Ibrahim. Ibrahim, you pointed out that the youth in Africa, they are the most insecure. So my question is, what can be done to ensure that they become secure on the land?
Yeah, I think this is a very valid question, and this is also why we are all discussing about this issue. We are still looking for the solution. I think that the solution is not on the table, but what I can say is more and more people are engaging with the government when it comes to come up with land policies, and I think what we can do is to ensure that the youth are involved and the youth are having their seats in those tables where the decisions are taken.
All right, thank you so much. We'll pick some questions from the viewers now. So our first question reads, what about migration? Domestic or cross-border is a solution for the young to tackle the lack of opportunity in rural areas. So Zifa, can you please attend to the issue of migration and as a way of tackling land in access in the rural areas?
Okay, thank you. From the Ghanaian context, rural-urban migration, urban-rural migration, and rural-rural migration is not new. It's not novel. People move to acquire lands elsewhere. So cocoa, for instance, cocoa production in Ghana, for instance, is a very migrant kind of thing. Both in labor and in cocoa production itself, the farmers and people who do the food crops in the cocoa growing areas to feed cocoa farmers. So migration itself is a double-edged thing. When migrants go to places, they take land and they cause land prices to also move up. So meanwhile, their labor is also needed for the agrarian structure over there to move. So migration is an answer. You can move to areas that have land to establish, but it doesn't also make it cheaper because you pay more. We know that intergenerational transfer of land inheritance is the main thing, as our agricultural census is saying. But then this is no longer an option for many people because once the land is lost, it's lost to the generations. So we can explore migration, but we need land reforms to make sure that you migrate not because you don't have land in your area, but for better opportunities, right?
All right, thank you, Zifa, for this. We move on to the next question from the viewers, please. The question reads, it's from Syriac Kazimana. He asks, how are domestic and regional food markets changing across Africa? With what implications for the opportunities and constraints for rural young people involvement in agriculture? I will try to simplify it. Dr. Elena, can you try to attempt how, these exports of in Namibia, how can the youth be involved in this the export of
Dr. Elena, can you try to attempt how, these exports of in Namibia,
what is the implication of this
can the youth the export? Dr. Elena, can you try to attempt how, these exports of
Okay, I can, but the voice. Okay, sorry, there was I think there were two videos that were open at the same time. Okay, how are domestic and regional changing across Africa? I'll say with regards to the markets across Africa and what implications, look, each country, when it comes to involvement of youth in agriculture, you'd find, for example, some countries are more advanced than the others. The resources are there that are different. For example, you find some countries have, irrigation systems that are far well advanced. For example, in Namibia, we still to get there. Of course, there is farming that's taking place, but for example, irrigation and so forth, it's still something that you cannot talk of successful agriculture if you don't have sufficient water and all those resources that one would need. Now, when you talk about the food markets, how are those, how domestic and regional food markets changing across Africa? I think there is progress, but the implications when it comes to the opportunities and constraints for rural young people involvement, I think there needs to be more involved, and they need to be empowered to find agriculture attractive. Currently, they don't find it attractive. For example, there was a conference we did on youth in agriculture here in Namibia, and youth would argue that I would rather go for something that pays me better. I would rather be a teacher than a farmer. It doesn't pay me. But how can you then change the mindset? It's all about changing the mindset. Once you make agriculture attractive for young people, then of course that will also have an implication on the markets and the growing of the sector in different countries, because then you have different age groups involved, not just the old and people who are retired, but also this active involvement from all people, and that has implication for markets between different countries when it comes to expanding those markets. I think that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Elena. I have one question for all of our panelists. We have presented this youth, and most of our arguments are saying that the youth has to be provided this, that. What about the agents of the youth? For example, Zifa mentioned that they are land grabs. Are there any reactions from this youth? Are they passive victims? What can the youth do to that's my question to all of you guys.
Okay.
Ibrahim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is also another valid point. What we can see here in Senegal is when it comes to those land grabs or large-scale investment, mostly young people are constituting like a group of protesters. And there are a lot of protests going on around the country, and those protests are mostly carried forward by the young people, and this is also a kind of negotiation between the people coming from elsewhere and then the local young people to negotiate and see if they can end up having a win-win
Thank
let's
you,
say,
Rama.
agreement.
What's your insight on this? What can the youth do? Because by definition, youth are a double-edged sword. They've got energy. We know this. They've been part of revolutions. So, but in this land question, how come the youth are silent? What can they do?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make, George, and question, and especially where the state is at the center of the processes that are happening in the rural areas, and where the state has the obligation to protect communities, and sometimes the agency of the communities is required. I would say that the young people, I cannot state how organized they have been in rural areas. It should be organic. But then there is call for support for such processes, for young people to take their voices and have agency and organize in ways in which they can not be passive and expect that certain processes favor them. And in the case of Kenya, for instance, where land now, the former pastoral rangelands, which are now changing into agro-pastoral areas, young people may need to organize to be able to take up their spaces in these areas, because they are not recognized as owners because of their age. So this is something that can be looked into on how they can be supported to organize.
All right, thank you, Rama. We move on to the next question from the viewers. Godfrey Masai asks, is there a country in Africa which can be considered the best case in terms of progressive youth land rights, policies, and programs? It's open to you, Zifa. You have done so much research across Africa. Is there any shining example of a country which you say youth can take a leaf from?
I think I will not say that I've seen one, because many countries across the continent are following this land reform template that which institutions have proposed. So once the land markets are developing, we sure know that people are excluded, and it's the weaker people who are excluded. People whose access to land are derivative, they are derived from others. So young people, migrants, women, and the poorer people in the community are those that do not benefit, are not able to access land. I do not know. In Ghana, I can't see one. And with my review of literature, I do not see progressive land rights policies across. Maybe in other countries, if someone knows that one, but it's how it is going is frightening, because every day many people in families are dispossessed, and the dispossession in such a way that the language is framed in a liberal term, so that you think that when that company comes, you get a job. You see, so you see in one of these cases in Ghana, for instance, where a company went to take land that for salt mining, that area used to accommodate 3,000 artisanal salt miners, women, mainly women. Okay, but the company employed 80 people. So imagine the win and lose issues. So I've not seen one. We don't yet have it.
Okay, thank you, Zifa, for this. I'll come back to you, Ibrahim. We have one burning question from the viewers, and please, let's have this question. It's from Dimona Piri, should be in Zambia, I think, a colleague. What are some of the inheritance issues being faced by female youth in agriculture, and what interventions can be utilized to curb these issues to ensure participation? So I pose this question to you, our panel, and as you answer it, you can also give your parting shots. What can be done to address issues facing female youth in agriculture? Then you can also add your parting shot on this. Thank you. Ibrahim, go ahead.
I want to address the issue, the question posed by Jeffrey Masai, a friend of mine. I think I cannot allow me to not take it from the governmental perspective, but what CSOs are doing. I mentioned it in my presentation that ILC is supporting national land platforms at the national level in I think 11 countries right now, and what we can see is in Malawi they are doing a lot in supporting this issue of youth accessing to land, and this is part of their strategy, and they are doing quite a lot on that. So not from a governmental perspective, but and as a CSO perspective. And then also hi to Dimuna. I think there is a big issue around this inheritance, and I mentioned it early that for the Prindex data, what we can see is youth, but also females are facing a lot of issues in case of divorce for it can be young ladies or it can be also adult ladies. They are facing some troubles in land-related matters in case of divorce, but also in case of death of the spouse, and this is also something to consider in the advocacy.
Thank you. Elena, your parting shot, what can be done for female youth?
I think for female youth, the issue of when you're talking about female youth, normally they lose out when it comes to land. Because, for example, a practical example in Namibia is that inheritance normally given to the older people or to males who believe that they can build a family. A female is like you can go start your own family, but then when you go to another family, that land belongs to someone else. I think what needs to be done is there needs to be although these things are in policies that everyone has a right to land, on practice, it's not practiced like that because there is this traditional practices that there is flexibility that anything can go. So I think there needs to be strength. The current regulations need to be strengthened, and there needs to be more take cognizant of females as well, just like take cognizant of males, so that there's equal share of resources, and also revise maybe the current practices on the ground so that we can really look the issues of inheritance and equal opportunities to resources. I would say that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Rama. Your take, what can be done for female youth and for youth? Is there a future for youth in agriculture? Your parting shot.
Yeah, so the question of female youth and inheritance has been here with us for a very long time. One of the attempts that have been made here in Kenya, especially among the pastoralists and communities who own land communally, is to have an express provision for that women and men have equal rights to owning this land, and ensuring that they engage in those they participate in decision making, and requirements that they must sit in the land management committees. So attempts like this have been found to be very difficult to implement, but there's always a place to start. Other than that, the idea that they have been left out maybe just be in paper, because the rural African women are the ones that have been running the agrarian systems in Africa, even if that has not been recorded or recognized. So my parting shot is that the youth have a place to start, and they need to take up, have agency and participate fully.
Thank you, Rama. Zifa, your parting shot, what can be done to ensure more women? And Rama has just said the women are already involved. What's your parting shot to youth in agriculture?
Okay. So shortly, we know that women are very central to food distribution and processing and marketing. So we need platforms that will enable them to do this better. They need better working conditions. We know that there have been online platforms that people are using now, but you need connection. And rural areas in Ghana and many parts of Africa do not have that. So we need that. You need a smartphone. You need data. So we need to put all this together to see how best we can enhance agriculture distribution and marketing.
Thank you, Zifa, and thank you to all our panelists. And the message from the panelists is that the youth are facing, variegated, challenges when it comes to agriculture, and the youth have to take charge to be more involved and to take what belongs from them and demand it from the youth bearers. I thank you so much for your time, and to the viewers, thank you very much. Next week, same time, PLAAS we have another webinar. And to those who missed it, this one, they can always watch it on YouTube. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.